Whenever you search for quantum computing, you'll often stumble upon this complex-looking golden chandelier type of machinery. This is called a superconducting quantum computer, and it's only one of many different types currently out there. Each type has their own pros and cons, but in the end they all have the same purpose: to process information and solve problems that classical computers simply are not built to handle. Now for this video, we'll focus on the neutral atom quantum computer. Not only is it the simplest one to understand, but it's also leading the race to become the first to be practically and commercially useful. It works in 3 simple steps. First, individual atoms are isolated and held perfectly still in midair using lasers and magnets. Second, precisely aimed lasers manipulate the state of each atom, effectively writing data onto them. This is how information can be processed. And third, that information gets relayed back into a classical computer using, once again, another set of laser sequences. But before we can do any of this, we first need to create an environment with a specific set of conditions inside of the enclosed chamber where all of this action happens. The first crucial step is to simply remove as many air molecules as possible from our chamber. If we don't do this, air molecules will collide with our individual atoms, causing disturbances and making it impossible for us to trap, manipulate, and process information. The next step is to find the perfect ingredient, or in other words, the perfect atom. For this computer, rubidium is the top choice. This element is perfectly tuned to commercially available lasers. This means that we don't even need expensive and custom-built lasers to manipulate it. Rubidium also has a single outer electron. This unpaired electron is where quantum information can be stored and encoded, making it the ideal candidate for this quantum computer. So now that we found our top ingredient, our next step is to actually isolate this ingredient on an atomic level. To do this, a small chunk of rubidium metal is placed inside of our enclosed chamber and is gently heated up, which eventually vaporizes it. Once vaporized, rubidium atoms will separate and instantly zip around at hundreds of miles an hour. But we can't manipulate them if they're moving like this. This is why specifically tuned lasers are aimed directly at the vapor cloud, which cools down the atoms to near 0 Kelvin. At the same time, magnets create an invincible force field which contains the cold cloud, locking the atoms nearly perfectly still. From there, a second set of highly focused lasers equipped with highly sensitive cameras, also known as optical tweezers, grab individual atoms one by one and moves them into their precise location on our quantum circuit board. Every isolated atom on our circuit board is now considered a qubit, ready for the true quantum magic. Now, qubits aren't physically wired up like traditional computers. Instead, they're all suspended in midair and precisely arranged in a 2D grid-like checkerboard. The distance between each qubit is absolutely crucial. You want neighboring qubits to be close enough, usually only a few micrometers, while non-neighboring qubits should be far enough, typically more than twice that distance. But why? Because whenever we hit a qubit with a specifically tuned laser pulse, the qubit's zone of influence, which is an electric field surrounding the entire atom, will suddenly grow thousands of times bigger than its original size. Any neighboring qubit located within this zone is now perfectly placed to interact with the enlarged qubit. To trigger this interaction, a second laser pulse hits one of the neighboring qubits. But because of the huge electric field overlapping it, the neighbor is blocked and is unable to grow. This behavior is what creates quantum entanglement. This quantum connection is, in a way, the equivalent of electrical currents passing information between bits in a classical computer. Now, in a classical computer, a bit can only be in a state of either 1 or 0. There's either an electrical current or there isn't. While qubits can either be 0, 1, or in a superposition state, meaning it can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. And this is why quantum computing can be so advantageous. To demonstrate this advantage, let's compare both computers completing the same task. Let's say we have one key and 100 doors. We need to find out which door can be opened with our key. A classical computer would have to check all 100 doors one by one, taking around 50 attempts on average just to find the correct door. In the meantime, a quantum computer, because of its superposition state, can, in a way, check all 100 doors all at once and would only take a total of 10 attempts to confidently find the correct door. But hold on, if a quantum computer can check every possibility all at once, then why can it not just spit out the correct answer right away? And why would it take 10 attempts and not just one attempt? The answer lies in the extreme fragility behind a qubit's superposition state. As soon as you have an external force that interacts with a qubit, such as heat, air molecules, sound waves, etc., its superposition state instantly collapses and turns into a definite 0 or 1 state. So whenever we fire a laser pulse to measure a qubit's state, the qubit will never spit out 31 or 76, it can only spit out 0 or 1. So now let's say the correct answer is door number 96. For a quantum computer to spit out this number, we would first need at least 7 qubits, allowing it to spit out a binary code of 11000000. But the real problem is this: the qubits' zeros and ones are always probabilistic in nature. And this is why it takes multiple attempts and not just one attempt. Whenever you're working with randomness and probabilities, you can't just assume that the right answer will appear right away. Instead, you need to utilize what we call Grover's algorithm. This algorithm takes the total number of all possible outcomes, which in our case is 100, and then takes the square root of that number, which is 10. So to find the correct answer in a pile of 100 different possibilities, a quantum computer only needs to perform at least 10 processing operations. Now 10 operations alone is already 5 times faster than a classical computer, which requires 50 operations on average just to solve the same problem. This may not sound like much, but if we scale this to say 100 million doors, that's 50 million operations on average for a classical computer, while a quantum computer would only take the square root of 100 million, which is 10,000. That's the quantum advantage. Now, before the processing can even begin, every qubit must be initialized into the starting 0 state using a specially tuned laser. Immediately after, a second laser pulse flips each qubit from a 0 state into a superposition state. But putting them in a superposition state alone won't do anything unless the 7 qubits can communicate and interact with each other. To do this, a powerful laser pulse hits one of our qubits, which increases its zone of influence. Then, another pulse hits a neighbor located within that zone, which creates entanglement and allows the 2 qubits to interact. This laser pulse must be repeated multiple times until all the qubits are entangled in a checkerboard-like pattern. From here, the qubits essentially act as a single unit, capable of representing every number between 0 and 100 simultaneously. But to actually find the correct door, another set of lasers called algorithmic pulses hits the qubits multiple times, and by utilizing Grover's algorithm, the wrong answers get cancelled out, while the right one gets amplified. Now, it's also worth noting that both the entanglement and algorithmic laser pulses are non-destructive, meaning the lasers do not collapse the qubits' superposition states. Once the calculation is completed, a final laser pulse hits each qubit, which collapses their superposition states and reads out the final answer. Now, for quantum computing to truly become useful for real-world breakthrough applications, we still face an immense challenge: qubit errors. The qubit's superposition state is simply way too fragile to external forces, which unfortunately produces way too many unwanted errors. And right now, the most reliable way to fix all of these errors is to introduce extra qubits into our circuit board, which act as a safety net and constantly check and correct the errors. So if we go back to our example of 1 key and 100 doors, which required at least 7 qubits to spit out the answer, in reality, we would need an extra 350 to 7,000 helping qubits. So for every one logical qubit that we have, we actually need an extra 50 to 1,000 helping qubits. Now, if we take Shor's algorithm as an example, which is an algorithm that puts the entire foundation of classical encryption at risk, this algorithm alone requires at least 4,000 logical qubits and an extra 200,000 to 4 million helping qubits. Now compare that to the most advanced quantum computers that we have today, which only have around 1,000 qubits in total. You can quickly see how far we are from the quantum cybersecurity threat. But right now, the race isn't about building quantum computers with the most amount of qubits. The actual race is about improving the error correction methods so that we require less helping qubits to begin with. Whether it's implementing more accurate lasers to reduce failures, or finding new materials to better control heat and electromagnetic fields, or even improving the mathematical equations of the error correction codes themselves. Every few days, there's a new breakthrough in quantum computing. While Shor's algorithm is still very far away from reality, other real-world applications are getting very close. This includes simulating small sections of a battery's material to improve its efficiency, or even simulating small sections of an enzyme for drug discovery. These applications require a lot less logical qubits, sometimes as little as 25, and for that reason, this will likely be the first real-world application in which quantum computing will revolutionize first. But hold on, if all we need is 25 logical qubits, with an extra 50 helping qubits each, well, that's only 1,250 qubits in total. Isn't that achievable? Why aren't we building the first practical quantum computers as we speak? The answer is because of one final war that quantum computing still hasn't beaten yet: the time war. Every time helping qubits catch an error, a highly sensitive camera will spot it, and then a classical computer has to crunch in the data to figure out what went wrong and then fix that error, if needed, with a laser pulse. But every millisecond spent fixing an error is a millisecond that eats away at the quantum advantage. In the quantum world, speed is everything. So to actually make a quantum computer practically useful, we don't just need a machine that requires less helping qubits. We need a machine that spends less time fixing errors using a classical computer. Now, because a single video like this can only scratch the surface behind the complexity and detail of quantum computing, we'll have to turn it into a multi-part series. Next time, we'll explore topological quantum computing, which attempts to bypass qubit errors entirely by storing information within quasi-particles called anyons, instead of storing it locally like the spin of an outer electron. If you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching.